Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to The Armchair Historian, and this one is the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan by Animated History. And yeah, I've reacted to this channel a couple times. I don't know the whole situation with the invasion of Afghanistan, to be fair. I've not really learnt about it, which is probably something that I should have learnt about. But yeah, I saw this pop up and I just wanted to do a sort of a history-based reaction. And yeah, I enjoyed the reactions from the channel before. I feel like I learnt a lot. And here's another one. Also, a quick shout out to my Patreon. I'm starting to do series reactions, iconic shows or films or whatever from the past, from present, whatever it is. I'm listening to people suggesting to me. I've just done a reaction to The Office, but that's just the start. I'm going to start doing reactions to all kinds of, again, films from the past and like iconic shows, etc. And also still YouTube reactions that I can't post onto here. I will still be posted there. But yeah, if you're interested in that, links will be in the description. You can suggest what you want me to see. I'm doing it like based on like polls and suggestions, etc. So yeah, that's going to start now around probably the 7th, 8th December. I'll start posting them consistently, hopefully. And yeah, based off your suggestions, they all go there. But let's jump into this reaction and see this whole situation.
By checking out armchairhistory.tv. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and join our Discord. This video is sponsored by NordVPN.
Money. Let's go, man. I love seeing people get sponsored, honestly.
On the frigid slopes of Takur Ghar in southern Afghanistan, a team of Navy SEALs are engaged in combat. As they struggle to make progress through the knee-deep snow, Taliban and Al-Qaeda insurgents open fire on them with rifles and machine guns. With most of the SEAL team already pinned down, Master Sergeant John...
Is this the guy that I've seen? I've seen the footage of that, the one guy who like, I don't remember the exact footage, but there's like the footage from the camera view of him just fighting back against many people.
A. Chapman takes the initiative, pushing forward up the slopes and drawing fire away from his comrades. Encountering an enemy bunker, he eliminates the occupants in a deadly close-quarters firefight. Even as the SEAL team leader pushes up the mountain to assist him, Chapman emerges from the bunker and engages the second enemy position, sustaining several direct hits in the process. Although he will succumb to his wounds before medical help can arrive, his heroic actions saves the lives of his squad mates, earning him a posthumous Medal of Honor.
What a guy, man. Fuck. That is insane. You can't really comprehend how the guy mentally is just so ahead of anyone, how you can just persevere through stuff like that just to, well, I say just save, to save people. You're putting your own life at risk, and eventually he obviously passed away, sadly, at the to save other people. Like, it's insane. It's insane in obviously a positive way. What an absolute legend that man is.
The sacrifice of John A. Chapman was just one more name added to the list of men who died in the pursuit of justice over September 11th, a date forever seared into the American consciousness. On that infamous day, 4 planes were seized by members of Al-Qaeda. While one was diverted from its target by the heroic efforts of its passengers, the other 3 would go on to strike the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, inflicting nearly 3,000 casualties in the worst terror attack to ever occur on US soil. But even as rescue teams began picking through the rubble, a cry for vengeance went out, resounding across the wounded nation. No matter who was responsible, this attack would not go unanswered. From the start, U.S. intelligence operatives had one chief suspect in mind: Osama bin Laden, head of Al-Qaeda and former member of Osama bin Laden, head of Al-Qaeda and former member of one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia.
Huh?
Bin Laden was...
He came from a wealthy family. Damn, I didn't clock that. He was 6'4", 6 to 6'6". Damn, I knew he was quite tall, but that's massive.
Already a suspect in the bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa, and the Clinton administration had made several efforts to apprehend or assassinate him in 1998 and 1999. Unfortunately, bin Laden was a wily opponent, seemingly capable of escaping from any trap. But with the international spotlight now firmly on Al-Qaeda's activities after the 9/11 attacks, pressure began to mount on their primary supporters in the Middle East, the Taliban. While the US was still mourning its dead, President George W. Bush issued a stirring ultimatum to the Taliban, who were the de facto rulers of Afghanistan. His message was clear and succinct: expel al-Qaeda and turn over bin Laden, or we will smash your illegal regime to pieces and dig him out of the rubble ourselves. The Taliban stubbornly refused, and so the stage was set for yet another bloody conflict in the Middle East. But before we discuss the 2001 invasion, let's take a few minutes to establish some context. Historically speaking, Afghanistan has been one of the most tumultuous and unstable regions on Earth. Isolated from its neighbors by the tall peaks of the Hindu Kush, it remained a land of nomadic cattle farmers and tribal fiefdoms well into the 20th century. Any real developments in modern infrastructure were rudely interrupted by the 1978 Communist Revolution, which led to a Soviet invasion 1 year later. As the new frontline of the ongoing Cold War, Afghanistan received immediate attention from a plethora of state actors, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and most importantly, Pakistan. Ever since it gained independence in 1947, Pakistan has had good reason to meddle in Afghanistan's affairs. Much as Germany in the 19th century devoted its diplomatic efforts to prevent an alliance between France and Russia, Pakistan has invested huge amounts of time and resources into preventing Afghanistan from establishing ties with India. Such a union would isolate Pakistan, leaving it vulnerable economically and militarily.
Is there really that much hostility between India and Pakistan? I knew they weren't like allies, but I didn't realize there was that much tension. What is the whole history? Is it to do with it's to do with something to do with Britain? No, I swear Britain are part of the reason there's the whole problems between the two countries. I can't actually remember. Maybe I should do a reaction to that separately, but damn, I didn't realize there was that much tension between the two.
During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Pakistani Inter-Service Intelligence Agency, or ISI, anonymously funneled money and equipment from the CIA and Saudi Arabia to guerrilla forces in Afghanistan. The largest of these forces was the Mujahideen, a diverse group of tribal warlords and jihadists with little in common besides the shared goal of driving out their foreign occupiers. Using Afghanistan's mountainous terrain to their advantage, the Mujahideen waged a successful campaign of guerrilla warfare against the USSR. When the Soviet Union was forced to pull out of the country in 1989, it led to the total collapse of the not-so-democratic Republic of Afghanistan just 3 years later. It was during this period that the Taliban first came to prominence. Consisting of ethnic Pashtun students from traditional Islamic schools, the Taliban initially seemed a preferable alternative to the Mujahideen, who are now busy fighting amongst themselves. Taking advantage of this chaos, the Taliban stormed onto the international stage. They captured the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, and set up the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. This oppressive, totalitarian government would be officially recognized only by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and of course, Pakistan. Under the new regime, Afghanistan quickly became a safe haven for terrorists, drug traffickers, and slavery rings. By 1999, the country was exporting at least 4,000 tons of opium poppies, 75% of the world's supply. This was often the sole source of income for Afghan villages, ensuring that support for the Taliban would continue despite their brutal interpretation of Sharia law. This made the country a perfect hiding place for al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. Of course, by 2001, the United States was no stranger to combat operations in the Middle East. During the Gulf War, US forces had smashed Saddam Hussein's forces, despite the dictator possessing the fourth largest standing army in the world. Invading Afghanistan, however, presented challenges not seen since Vietnam. The US would face a decentralized guerrilla force, many of whom were veterans of the Soviet-Afghan War. While Saddam had arrogantly attempted to match the US gun for gun, the Taliban could simply retreat into their mountain strongholds and wait for the storm to pass.
It's the terrain they know. They know that sort of stuff. They know the areas. Of course, it's going to be the advantage to them.
The key to a successful invasion was to cut off the Taliban from support in the Middle East. That meant dealing with Pakistan, whose inter-service intelligence agency had been a staunch ally of the Taliban since their inception. The US laid down a simple ultimatum. Pakistan was either against the Taliban or against America. When the leader of the ISI implored Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage to consider the complex history of the situation, Armitage simply replied, "No, the history begins today." Pakistan formally renounced its support for the Taliban on the 15th of September.
Pakistan was backing the Taliban. I didn't know that either. What the hell?
Just 4 days after 9/11. The next step was to establish contact with the sole opposition group to the Taliban left in Afghanistan, the Northern Alliance. Operating out of the remote Panjshir Valley, the Northern Alliance was chiefly composed of former Mujahideen who had agreed to set aside their differences and present a united front against their enemies. On September 26th, an 8-man team of CIA agents operating under the codename Jawbreaker arrived in the Panjshir Valley. Their purpose was to secure the cooperation of the Northern Alliance, a task made considerably easier by the $3 million in cash they had brought with them.
They brought money to try and bribe them into back off or whatever. What do you think they're gonna? I mean, I don't know if that's the case, but I'm assuming they're giving it to them. What do you think they're gonna do with the money? Their beliefs aren't just gonna change. Oh no! I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's completely not related, but if that is, that's not looking good, bruv. I mean, what? It sounds like a great idea looking at this from hindsight, but in general, it doesn't seem like a good idea.
Jawbreaker was then joined by Task Force Dagger, which began providing equipment and training to the Alliance militia. 10 days later, the US-led coalition of nations launched an aerial bombing campaign. Taliban fighters all across the country had their morning prayer routines rudely interrupted by thousands of pounds of US ordnance, raining down on air bases and military infrastructure. Within 24 hours, the Taliban's air defense network was obliterated, and ground forces were cleared to move in. The coalition was made up of men from several nations, including the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. But at the start, only the US and the UK were directly involved. Additionally, Special Forces units from dozens of countries were involved in the invasion. The first Special Forces squads were inserted into the Panjshir Valley via the same route taken by the Jawbreaker team.
Imagine how scary that would be, genuine. I know these people are trained for it, so they're probably not anywhere near as scared as the general person would be, but even then, imagine how just being put into this environment, it's just, I can't imagine, man.
There, they met with the overall commander of the Northern Alliance, Fahim Khan, and began a long and arduous trek through the mountains to the Taliban-controlled city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Simultaneously, members of the 75th Regiment of U.S. Army Rangers airdropped onto an airstrip southwest of Kandahar.
All around.
Thanks to skirmishes with the Northern Alliance closer to the city, only a single unfortunate Taliban soldier had been left as guard. With that airstrip secured as a forward operating base for later operations, the assault on Mazar-e-Sharif began on the 9th of November. The Taliban had entrenched around the city, but their fortifications only prolonged the inevitable. After the U.S. Air Force spent a few days bombarding the defenders, 2,000 Northern Alliance fighters, led by General Abdul Rashid Dostum, stormed the city to mop up any remaining resistance. After a battle that lasted only 90 minutes, 700 Taliban fighters had been killed or captured. The Northern Alliance suffered fewer than 50 casualties. The fall of Mazar-e-Sharif came as a major shock to both the Taliban and U.S. Central Command. Both parties had assumed the city would resist for months and require a long period of brutal street fighting to liberate. But now, the road to Kabul lay wide open, and the Northern Alliance wasted no time advancing south towards the capital. To their astonishment, the Taliban offered no resistance, and Kabul fell only 3 days later. This pattern continued for several weeks. Conventional resistance was all but pointless. U.S. air power was absolute, and moving in the open was a death sentence. The largest battle fought during this period was at the city of Kunduz, where 5,000 Taliban and al-Qaeda soldiers were besieged by coalition forces for 12 days. During
Holy
this time, the 75th Ranger Regiment conducted assaults on Taliban camps in the mountains around Kandahar. America was sending a strong message. Their forces could be anywhere, at any time, with no warning. There was nowhere to hide. However, despite all progress, things were about to take an abrupt turn for the worse. On November 25th, a prisoner revolt broke out at Qala-e-Jangi near Mazar-e-Sharif. Over 600 Taliban and Al-Qaeda POWs seized the fortress and its armory, which included heavy weapons such as machine guns and rocket launchers.
Oh no.
Although the revolt was eventually crushed, the body of CIA agent Johnny Michael Spann was recovered from the rubble. He was the first American killed in Afghanistan as a result of direct combat.
So after all this, before this happened, there was no deaths to Americans from what had just happened. What?
Meanwhile, the siege of Kunduz ended with the Taliban surrendering en masse. However, many of their leaders were mysteriously absent when the city fell. It is suspected that they were airlifted out of the city by the ISI shortly before it fell. This incident, known as the Airlift of Evil, is one of the most controversial of the whole war, and symbolic of the complicated political game being played out in the background of the invasion. Speaking of politics, November's operations saw the rise of Hamid Karzai, future president of Afghanistan. Using a small guerrilla force backed up by coalition troops and air support, Karzai liberated the town of Tarankot on the 15th and defended it against a Taliban counterattack. Local militia then flocked to Karzai's banner, swelling his ranks to over 800 men. On December 6th, Kandahar, the Taliban's last major stronghold in Afghanistan, came under siege. The city had already been the target of coalition bombing campaigns and had been hit by a wide variety of ordnance, including Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Fucking hell.
Now surrounded on all sides, the defenders decided that negotiation might actually be preferable to death after all. In the end, the biggest obstacle US forces faced was a friendly fire incident that saw a bomb dropped near Hamid Karzai's position, lightly wounding him
They friendly fight. Wait, so they done it to themselves?
and killing 3 American soldiers.
Oh wow.
Despite this,
what?
negotiations were successful, and Kandahar surrendered on the 7th. With this victory secure, Hamid Karzai became Afghanistan's new president, which marked the end of the Taliban regime. Although there was no sign of Osama bin Laden or most of Al-Qaeda's leadership. US intelligence speculated that they fled to Jalalabad, and the coalition mounted a swift pursuit. But then, the terrorist forces withdrew to one location everyone had hoped to avoid, the infamous White Mountain Cave network known as Tora Bora. Not wishing to repeat Soviet mistakes, coalition leaders decided to rely on local Afghan troops for the assault. Using money provided by the CIA, they recruited 3,000 militia and sent an Army Special Forces team, Operation Detachment Alpha 572, to advise and support them. Initially, things seemed to be going well. The militia were able to take the mountain slopes, and airstrikes were called on every insurgent, suspected insurgent, or suspicious patch of grass in the area. Fighting in the caves proved harder, and the Afghan militia was not as well suited to the task as their CIA handlers had assumed. In fact, the militia leader was persuaded to open negotiations with the terrorists. During the brief ceasefire that ensued, most of Al-Qaeda's leaders, likely including bin Laden, escaped into Pakistan.
Fuck. Imagine fighting in this though, in that cave, in the caves and stuff, mate. That is so, like, I just couldn't imagine doing these things. This whole video is just things I couldn't imagine, but wow, man, people that would go through this and then obviously sadly be killed. Yeah, it's horrible.
Although
And they
deeply
were this close to getting Osama bin Laden. All this stuff makes you realize just how much sweeter it was for when they actually caught him, because they were trying to find him for how long? What, 10 years? Maybe longer?
frustrated by their failure to capture the primary objective of the invasion, coalition leaders tried to remain positive. Afghanistan was now nominally free from Taliban rule, and the democratic process seemed to have resumed. Aid workers and relief supplies were pouring in, and it had cost the West fewer than 100 casualties. Unfortunately for America, the highly controversial occupation had just begun. In February of 2002, a US intelligence analyst identified what was presumed to be a force of around 300 Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters moving into the Shah-e-Khat Valley. In response, the US airlifted 2,000 Special Forces soldiers into the area, where they were joined by 1,000 Afghan militia. Operation Anaconda began on March 2nd and would quickly become known as an unmitigated disaster. From the moment they touched down, the American forces found themselves in a Taliban kill zone. The insurgents were heavily armed, and the Apache gunships that were supposed to provide air support found themselves under concentrated fire from rocket launchers and anti-materiel rifles. 2 Chinook helicopters were shot down, and mortars bombarded US positions. The Afghan militia, meanwhile, blundered around the valley in brightly colored trucks with headlights blazing, making perfect targets for Taliban mortars. Although numerical superiority, training, and air support eventually turned the tide in America's favor, Operation Anaconda demonstrated key weaknesses in both their tactics and coordination with local forces. Even after the valley was cleared, a mere 23 Taliban bodies were found. The exact number present in the valley has never been verified, but it is thought that there were at least 600 or more initially suspected and most likely escaped over the border when the tide of battle turned.
Wow.
8 US soldiers were killed and dozens more wounded. The Pyrrhic victory of Operation Anaconda set the tone for US operations in Afghanistan for the next decade. The start of the Iraq War in 2003 also diverted resources from the region, leaving the new UN-sanctioned government all but powerless beyond the capital city of Kabul. Most importantly, Osama bin Laden remained at large, his whereabouts unknown and his debt to the American people still outstanding. The manhunt for the notorious leader of Al-Qaeda would continue long after news from Afghanistan stopped making headlines. We'll be covering the end of that manhunt next week with our video titled Operation Neptune Spear. As the US prepared for the invasion of Afghanistan, data security was a top priority. Even a small, seemingly insignificant...
Come on, let's go, man. NordVPN, you'll love to see it. But yeah, I guess there's a part 2 to this that follows from this. I think it's this one, maybe. Yeah, whatever it is, let me know so I can check it out pretty much, because I know obviously how they. I don't know how they found him. I just know how it was. I don't even know about it. I just know how it ended for him. But I don't know how they managed to find him and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, if there's a video that he done for that you want me to check out, let me know. And yeah, until next time, peace.